Hi everyone, Raymond Psy here. I'm founder CEO of GoodData, and I'm gonna be running the discussion here today. The topic is the strategy for analytics leaders in BI, and I have a couple of guests today who will be joining me on this show. So can we bring the guests, please? Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. So why don't we start with introduction? Susan, why don't you go first, please?
Hi, Roman, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Susan Cook. I'm the CEO of Zaloni. I have been in BI and data and analytics for far too many years to count. Those of you who are of advanced age like me, you'll remember back to the days of early data warehousing, and I started at Arbor and Hyperion and then ran Oracle BI, and right before Zaloni had been at MicroStrategy for a number of years. So this space is my passion, and happy to talk about it today. And now I'm CEO of Zaloni. I joined about a year ago, and Zaloni, I'll explain in more depth as we go along. But if data is this golden asset, this fabulous product that we're all striving to get into the hands of those citizen data scientists and the people that need data to do their job, think of Zaloni as the supply chain management software for data. So happy to be here. Thanks, Roman.
Excellent. Thank you. Dux, can you go next, please?
Sure. First and foremost, thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm so grateful to be here. My name is Raymond Psy. I serve as the Chief Brand Officer of AvePoint. AvePoint is a company that helps you collaborate with confidence in Microsoft 365. We help migrate, manage, and protect your data as you move to Microsoft 365 and take advantage of all the goodness that Microsoft offers. So very excited today and looking forward to our conversation here and share some insights on how you can best tackle, manage, and make the most out of your data in the Microsoft Cloud.
Excellent. Thank you. Mike, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Palmer. I am the CEO of Sigma Computing. We are all about enabling the business decision makers and the people who are most interested in data in order to make decisions have direct access to their cloud data warehouse platforms. We've built a platform that allows people with spreadsheet skills to be able to tap the billions of records that are sitting inside their Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery environments, to be able to use those spreadsheet skills to do data analytics and manipulation of data, as well as do standard visualizations, presentations, and collaboration. We see a world where, and not just a world where we have a base of customers who ask ad hoc questions of their data on an hourly and daily basis at scale in a real-time way.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm going to go last. My name is Raymond Psy. I'm the founder and CEO of GoodData. And we've focused on scaling of analytics. How do we actually scale analytics to tens of thousands of people inside of outside of enterprise? How do we give insights to people who need decision again in the decision making? And it's all about building insights into business processes. We believe that we need to get rid of this notion that data needs a second pane of glass, that we need to, everyone needs to go to another tool to analyze data. And data needs to be, and insights actually need to be embedded into the daily processes, but that requires enormous level of integration and scale and trust and everything else that comes with enterprise systems. So we are making data insights enterprise ready. So those were the introductions today, and I will be moderating this discussion. We have about 50 minutes or 55 minutes to go. I want to start with a question. We all, about data as a value chain. We all look at data from our individual company's perspective, but our customers need data from all the way from, again, the source of data to the consumption. And it seems to me that it's a very long and convoluted value chain. And how do you actually, individual companies, how do you actually help manage that value chain? And where do you plug, what piece of the value chain you actually focus on, and what do you leave to the others? But let's start with the data as a value chain. Who's going to go first? Susan? Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. I think what has happened through this process of evolution, no one by design purposefully said we were going to have 18 to 20 different technologies and tools in the data value chain. That wasn't designed to be that way. I think it just happened over years, over acquisitions, over the shift from on-prem to cloud. That introduced a whole new set of tools and technologies. And I think now the realization of just how essential that data is to anyone's business in any industry has it's been the catalyst to this notion that we have got to figure this out in a sane, rational way. And I think stealing the paradigm of DevOps and RevOps, this new thought around data ops as its own discipline, its own process, has risen up to address that need. So I think there's this realization that has occurred that if we are going to manage data like the gold, like the currency, like it is the product that it is, we need to rationalize and manage and govern that chain as if we would anything else. So I see it, and that's our reason for being. That's why Zaloni was started up. But I think now is the time that we are going to give ourselves a chance to rationalize that chain soup to nuts. So I'll let my co-panelist weigh in on that.
So let me jump in. I have 3 specific thoughts and pretty much tips to organizations as they think about data value chain. Right. The first thought I have in consideration for everybody is that you have to think that today data is growing leaps and bounds, and because of the wonderful technologies we have. But as a result, oftentimes organization has just this assumption that people will know what to do with it and figure it out. So the first step and the first tip really is to really rationalize, as it was described, what are structured data versus unstructured data? Because what we're seeing is more of these unstructured data are being created, are being collected, produced, published, and being used. And then second is, once you have this data in your organization, now you have to consider, okay, especially the unstructured ones or the ad hoc data, which ones are referential and which one are being used for collaboration. Again, right? People think about back in the days of on-premises where everything's in the file share. I'm sure people watching here still love your 14 folders deep type of structure, but a lot of those content are archival and referential. We don't really work on it, right? But then people work on data today. How so? They send emails back and forth. They use Box, they use Dropbox, they use SharePoint. And that's great. But then sometimes people don't think about the idea of when to use what data and where to use them. So having that kind of guidance is critical for organizations as well. The last tip I would have when you think about data value chain is the impact of the data, right? Are there considerations around retention, or are there compliance requirements? Do I need to subscribe to Sarbanes-Oxley, or is this piece of information, the data I'm working with, is only good for this project, right? So what's the impact? Is it short term? Is it long term? And do I need to retain it? So really, those are the 3 things, right? Number 1, again, figure out structured versus unstructured. Second, is it referential, collaborative? Third, what are the long-term impact?
Yeah, excellent. And I'm sure we will get more to the notion of governance and especially in unstructured data, which is kind of, difficult animal on its own. Most people, when you talk about data, would actually focus more on structured data. But we will get back to that. Mike, from what you said in the beginning, it sounds like you focus more on the consumption side of the data value chain. You really kind of leverage all the efforts that other companies and other kind of parts of the data warehouse and data lake and all of the integration that's outside of your scope. You really focus on that second half of the value chain. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, as a guy that spent more than his fair share of years in telco, I hate to use this metaphor, but we are the last mile, right? We are. The infrastructure providers bring it to our neighborhood, but you don't get to watch cable or get fiber to your house until you bring it into the house, and that is our role. It's connecting the user to the data. I think that the world of data and data proliferation is going to get, I guess, by the way that we talk about it often, much worse or much better, really depending on who you are. I fear sometimes that some of the practices that we have as enterprises make us look like Yahoo in the 90s as opposed to Google. The idea that we'll create some sort of magical organization that's going to neatly make us understand how to curate our data and that we're going to control it, and that it's going to be sort of well managed, going back to this idea of a file share. I think what's probably more likely to happen is that you'll see more data sources. You will see not just more types of data, and I know we're talking structured and unstructured, but more importantly, you'll see more demand for sharing data. You'll see, and already are seeing, things like data marketplaces spring up. Snowflake is a great example of this. Enterprises, as they start to kind of bring forward data that they thought of archiving before and realize it has value, are going to start promoting that data in those marketplaces. We're going to have to start thinking about a world not where we are trying to count all the grains of sand on the beach and organize them into their proper place, but rather simply understanding that there is a vast amount of data out there. It's going to grow fast. And it's how do we provide access? How do we provide searchability? Who's interested? How do we recommend data to those people who would best value it? That's a whole different mentality. It's the mentality of Google back in the day saying, it's not my job to organize the internet. It's my job just to understand what's out there and direct users appropriately. I think that is the world we're heading for data. And so the job here is huge for infrastructure providers, because they're going to have to handle all these formats. They're going to have to handle high growth. They're going to have to handle performance. Mid-market companies today have billions of records of data. It's unthinkable 10 years ago. Pipelining that data and making it real-time available is a huge task. In our world, with all of that infrastructure flowing, how do you as a marketer have access to the data that will allow you to make your best campaign decisions, to be able to understand how your inventory is being managed? That's going to be the challenge that we're confronting.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
Well, I want to jump in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would argue that unstructured data is equally as important as structured data today.
Absolutely.
Because with all the sources, I have my phone, I can take a picture, I'll post on Twitter, and it's every marketer's dream. I work closely with my marketing colleagues, and we analyze all the likes in the post, what engagement we got. And you're right, it's tough to figure out, okay, which worked and what didn't work. And I think that's a major conundrum for a lot of organizations today.
Yeah, I agree. If I may kind of add my comment to all of this, is that I absolutely believe that we need to, we are getting better as an industry. We now have, again, the value chain is now being defined by the Redshift and Snowflakes and unstructured data stores and so on. And I see two main kind of initiatives happening. One is, how do I actually get all the data in a place and how do I actually consume it? And I think that your companies and my company are working along those lines. So we absolutely believe that the consumption side was always neglected, and people actually use desktop tools to connect to data directly with no governance and transparency. But let's actually focus on one thing that I also wanted to talk about. This notion of when we talk about data, most people would actually assume that data is there to kind of explore and see some trends and so on. But I always believe that we have to have data lab where data is being kind of discovered, or insights are being discovered. But we also have a need for what I would call a data factory. And I would actually, the analogy I'm always using is, imagine a car manufacturing company. They have a design department, but then they have a highly trusted, monitored, high quality production line that produces cars. And none of us would buy a car that comes from that research department. We want a car that actually can last 100,000 miles. And yet with data, everything seems to be very kind of science and exploratory and a very low level of trust and up to kind of experimentation and kind of everyone needs to interpret data their way. How do you see that? Do you work more, and as your companies, do you work more in that kind of a data design part of the data lab, or do you work more in the data factory that produces insights that can be trusted, that can actually run the business?
I would piggyback on your analogy of a factory. And similarly, now the provenance or the lineage of that data, Mike's customers cannot provide value to their constituents unless they trust that what came off that assembly line is actually going to be safe. And so that's why I think this focus on data having its own supply chain. Where did it come from? How many people have touched it? Is it clean? Is it structured? Is it unstructured? Does it sit in Snowflake? Does it sit in ADLS? Where has it been? Who sanctioned it? Which data steward says this is good to use, so that by the time that data scientist shops for provisions that data into whatever sandbox they're going to use, they've said the supply chain or where it came from is valid. I can use this. I can trust this. And I won't do harm to the people that are driving that car that just came off that assembly line. So that was a great analogy, Roman.
Thank you. But yeah, but my next question is, again, we talk about data scientists, and I think Mike's vision or the vision of Sigma is kind of that everyone should be be able to explore data. But is there a limit? Is every piece of data inside up for kind of interpretation, or do we need to define data that's kind of final and like productized and tested and so on? I think that one of the biggest problems of analytics is that it's limited to very few people that understand how to structure data in some desktop tool. And I know that Mike, you will kind of you will bring, and I would like to hear your response to that. But are we limited for interpret? Does everyone need to interpret data? That's my question.
No, it's a great question. I think when we talk about data science, we're often talking about people who are trying to ask what I'll call just very open-ended questions, and they may not even have a question, right? They're simply saying, "I thought it's data. Yeah, I'm looking for patterns, and hey, let's see what we find." And they may know nothing about the underlying data. They may know nothing about the business, but they're applying techniques that sort of give them indications of things that are interesting to look at. Our users tend to be the opposite. Our users have job responsibilities that are measurable. Marketers have campaign conversion rates that they care about. They're going to report on them and do report on them daily, weekly, monthly. We have people in supply chain groups that have to make inventory orders, right? And they want to do that efficiently. They start with a very clear and constructed view of what good looks like. For them, the delta often is clear responsibility and authority over decisions, but not a lot of tooling. And to your point earlier, access to useful data on a real-time basis that can allow them to make that decision. So while on the one hand, I agree with your point about the R&D department, you've got a bunch of people in the R&D department asking what's possible, but you have like a world full of users who are doing a job today efficiently, and they're just looking to have this cloud and data warehousing transformation show up to make their lives better. And that's not a science experiment. They're getting paid to do that job today.
One comment I have around this is I love the analogy of the factory. I want to expand that.
Yep, please.
The challenge we have today is in the past, right? The factory, only a few people can go in. The challenge today now is the factory is in like the middle of the entire compound.
Yep.
And everybody's walking back and forth, looking at it. No, you should do that. No, change that. No, make 2 of that, right?
Yep.
The people responsible for that chain, sometimes due to authority or maybe not knowing what they're doing, it gets confused. So that's a challenge we have. You talk about what's the one source of truth. There's really no one source of truth. So it goes back, I think about data. Obviously, it's very important. It fuels everything today. But also now we have to be smarter on leveraging technology that can potentially help automate things for us, that can help decide who can see it, who can't see it. Oh, you've shared it externally based on policy. It will self-destruct in 2 days, right? Or not only did I share it with Mike, but if Mike shares it with somebody else or another person who's not supposed to look at it, looks at it, there's some kind of mechanism to prevent that or block that. So again, it's challenging, but layering in with appropriate policies and automation to get the best hygiene we can, I think is critical.
Yeah, that's very good. And let's kind of finish this this section. The title of this kind of call is the best strategy for strategies for analytics leaders. So let's define one advice or the strategy is that while we all should have a highly trusted and governed and transparent data pipelines, the consumption of data needs to be split based on who's actually the user. Someone needs to collaborate, someone needs to trust the data to make decision in planning and so on, and someone needs to make wild hypotheses about what could happen if. And I think that one of the things that the data departments end up kind of in a wrong place is that they actually do all of that at the same time. And I think we need to one of the strategies I would recommend is to clearly separate what is your data lab, what is your data factory, but still focus on that kind of highly transparent data pipeline so that everyone can trust the data, regardless if it's a data scientist, citizen data scientist, frontline worker, someone collaborating with my kind of online tool with unstructured data. Let's move to a second kind of big topic that I wanted to discuss today, and that is the rise of the cloud. I'm like Susan. I'm with this business for a long time, and I'm surprised that we didn't see that many disruptions in the past. And I actually think that most of the innovation in data and in analytics were more like layers or sediments that you had your Teradata and MicroStrategy, and then you added Tableau and so on. And so there was never really a real disruption. Everything was kind of additive, and the old system didn't go away. The new system was put in place, and there are still people running, I'm sure, MicroStrategy that produce Tableau files today and so on. My assumption is that it all changes when data value chain is moving to the cloud, where the old infrastructure essentially cannot be moved there one for one, and you actually have to redesign it, re-architect it. And I actually believe that this is going to be the real disruption. This is going to be something that people will look at 20, 50-year-old pieces of infrastructure and say, this no longer works and I cannot take it to the cloud. And all of these sediments will go away. Do you share that perspective? How do you see kind of the cloud affecting your business and the whole value chain? And is it going to disrupt the data space more than anything in the past?
Yes.
Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, Susan.
Yes, emphatically. Yes. I think if you just lift and shift your legacy environment from on-prem into the cloud, you will have missed an incredible opportunity. And I think you need to embrace that opportunity as you're moving to the cloud to be smarter, more sane, more rational, more governed, because you can. Now, I think a lot of people think that is daunting. I think they say, oh, this is going to be huge. You know, I have 20 years of investment in that tech stack on-prem, and oh my goodness, you know, that's just going to take us years to do that. And I guess, Roman, getting back to your point, what is that one takeaway? What's that one piece of advice? Don't try to boil the ocean. It's okay to take an incremental approach. It is okay to take a segmented, phased approach as you move to the cloud. And for goodness sake, as you're doing it, still address business problems. If you're just moving data to the cloud for the sake of it, because you think that's what is supposed to happen, unless you get some sort of business benefit, some sort of lift, some sort of cost saving, or some sort of efficiency gain, that's not the right place to start. So my advice is look at this transition to the cloud as an opportunity, not as a burden. And as you do it, take an incremental approach and make sure you're getting some benefit as you go through that journey. So, Mike, I know I cut you off.
And I will actually get back to that. That's going to be my next big theme we will talk about, and that's data strategies. Like, you know, is everything built bottom up, or do we actually go to CDOs and so on and help them to design a data strategy that will help actually with this new perspective on data as a value chain and business outcomes and so on. But Mike, please, let's first let's talk about you know, is cloud a lift and shift, or is it like a big disruption of the whole value chain?
Oh, you know, again, it depends on what your value chain is. Are you talking about technology, or are you talking about business process? And I think
both. I actually think that many of the technologies are not available on-prem, are not available in the cloud. So everyone will have to redesign, re-architect, you know, and so on. So this creates a major disruption in how people process data today. And I see it as an opportunity. But and so again, my question is it going to be incremental, or is it kind of a big disruption that didn't happen in data for the last 50 years?
That's a hard question to answer. I take a slightly different view in the sense that first of all, I think the kind of the game is already over. You know, if you look at Q1 spend on cloud, 60% increase on cloud spending in just Q1. You know, the game's over. There aren't any companies investing in premises storage to house premises data. A lot of the legacy business processes that we all learned growing up kind of in the 90s and 2000s around data tiering and archiving, they're going to go away, primarily because the value of the data is too high and the cost of storage is declining so fast. One offsetting metric I talk to everybody about is if you look at, you know, and everyone judges data growth differently, but one number that seems to be repeated often is you get about a 60% year-over-year CAGR in data growth. If you look at the cost of storage per terabyte in AWS over the last 6 years, it's been negative 60%. You know, that's too compelling, right? I can get rid of a set of complicated business processes that strand data and instead adopt one where my costs go down every year, but so does my access and usability of the data. That's a no-brainer, right? Companies are going to wholesale move in that direction. Combine that with the fact that new application development is already happening in the cloud. And even if you didn't want it to be there, you're going to be forced in that direction anyway, because the developers that build those applications are not writing premises anymore, right? So this game's already over. You know, I think the question really becomes, as we make these even non-linear changes over time, but certainly going in one direction, what new processes come out of this? Like I really look at things like data marketplaces, which I've been talking about for 3 years, since around 2016 thing. This is where the world goes. People want to monetize that data. You have a number of companies who've been exceptionally successful because they have access to huge amounts of data. This is Facebook and Google and Amazon and others, where, you know, your local retailer or, you know, mid-market companies who have great services who don't have access to that data are severely disadvantaged. But when they go to a data marketplace or they establish relationships with companies that can get them the data they need, and they have the on-demand infrastructure to do it, that playing field will get leveled. You know, so we're going to see some significant changes fueled by declining costs in the cloud, increasing adoption of data warehousing, sophistication of data pipelining tools, the ability to share data and do it in a well-governed way, and then tools to access that data for your average user, not your technically adept user, not your SQL writer, but just someone that knows their business and can run a spreadsheet. These are very big changes that when you look forward 5 or 6 years, the world's going to look nothing like it does today when it comes to being a data-driven decision maker.
I just want to pile on to Mike's point about data marketplaces. I think so many of the insights and the value you're going to get out of data is going to come from data that's not in your four walls right now. These data marketplaces, it always used to be S&P or DNB or Equifax or IRI or whoever it was, all of that external syndicated data. The world is opening up to you that you can gain access, even if you're a tiny company, gain access to this available data to you, and you're going to have to manage it and govern it as if it were your own. But you're going to have to do that because there's so much insight to be gained from it. There's so much competitive advantage to be gained from data that doesn't sit in your four walls right now. So I completely agree with Mike on the rise of data marketplaces isn't just because it's cool technology, it's because it's competitive advantage.
And if we extend the point just slightly further, one of the things we don't even realize that we do in our business lives on a regular basis is that we make decisions based on aggregated data. And we've been talking for decades about personalization, about targeted to single users. Well, the reason we don't target things to single people is because the decisions we make to target them are inevitably aggregated. The data, when I dump it into my Excel I got 1 million rows, that's all I can play with.
That's right.
Or the amount of time it takes to scan 1 billion records to come up with a granular conclusion is impossible.
Well, one quick thing I want to add is I believe it's not on premises or the cloud, at least not today, right? So I certainly agree with Mike that, look, people are sold, going to the cloud is important. I think we're still at this juncture, especially large organization that can also think about having a hybrid model as they take this incremental step. So the first comment I have is, is it a lift and shift or incremental? I would say it's incremental, but in addition, I would highly advise that everybody take the Marie Kondo mindset. If you haven't watched Marie Kondo, it's on Netflix, but a lot of the stuff you don't need. There's going to be a lot of junk that you don't need to move, right? Think about your redundant, obsolete, trivial data. So that's one. Marie Kondo your data. That's important. Number two, it's true, right? Yeah. People don't think about it. They're like, oh, we're going to need this for job security. No, it's not. Get rid of stuff you don't need. Number two is if you do move to the cloud, then you have to think about some of the things you used to do on premises that may not be quite as possible as in the cloud. So if you're bounded by, again, compliance, 8 years later, 10 years later, you get audited by, some major auditing firm, you can't just pull the tape backup, call IT, hey, can you pull that tape backup from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago? You got to think about what your strategy is for backup, retention, records management in the cloud, depending on where you move to. Is it a SaaS platform, IaaS, or PaaS? And then the third key thing you have to think about now, especially if you're in the cloud, what kind of regulations you have to subscribe to. If you're, let's say, U.S. government organization, where's that cloud provider? Is it sitting in U.S. soil? More importantly, is it FedRAMP compliant? Well, what if you're in Germany? What are the other laws that you need to subscribe to? Is your provider allowing you to have an infrastructure where your data only lives and sit in that region? So, those are some of the three things you have to think about. But today, I still do believe that companies are in that in-between phase and they're still moving. So it's okay to have a hybrid state.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think that's going to be the next big topic. It's how we actually fund it, because this vision that we will have amazing infrastructure that will support every single decision, and examples like Netflix and Facebook and so on, that's expensive. And let's be honest, companies today spend probably 10% of what they actually need to spend, and they don't spend more because they don't see the ROI, but because they don't, spend, they will never see the ROI. So how do you actually break into this kind of a chicken and egg problem? before we actually move to that kind of how do you actually build ROI and how do you justify 10x of spend that the leading companies are actually spending, I want to kind of comment on this notion of data monetization. We actually are data marketplaces. We actually did a study and we asked about 1,000 CDOs about their perspective of data monetization and personalization, and half of the responses came absolutely negative. That the response was, we are not in business of selling our data. So it's kind of the data monetization has as much as we all see huge benefit of it in data marketplaces, I think that it does have a kind of a bad name, and it's all the scandals of Facebook and Google and so on selling data. So I think that it's a major problem that this industry, the data industry, has, is how do you actually overcome these fears of violation of privacy? But
Roman, did you ask them? Did you ask the same CEOs 10 years ago what they said about the security of cloud computing?
Oh, believe me, yeah. That's I remember my first presentation 10 years ago about cloud analytics, and someone from IT stood up and said, "I would much rather give my users no insights than cloud insights." That was the IT perspective. Was like, we have to keep it locked. So yeah, the things change. But I'm just posing as a kind of question for everyone, and we don't need to discuss it more. That's a major challenge. How do you actually kind of how do you overcome this fear of someone selling the data and so on? And we have good data. We actually kind of the data monetization and benchmarking and so on is a huge part of our business, but we don't talk about it as data monetization for this very reason, because we don't want to be seen as someone who sells data. But let's go. We have 20 minutes, and I would like to get covered at least one or two topics. But let's talk about funding, ROI. All of these changes, are fairly expensive, and we all have this kind of vision of a future where data and insights are embedded into every single decision and can be trusted. Have this massive infrastructure that I can actually analyze, billions of data sets and have the responses as needed, and no second pane of glass and so on. But so how when you go to your customers, how do you build the ROI case? Or do you need to do it, or and how do we do it as an industry? Because again, I do believe that on average, companies need to spend probably 10x what they are spending today, and excluding all of the leaders like the Netflix and Amazon and so on. But average company, bunch of copies of Tableau, it's that's not going to move the needle.
We certainly are engaged in ROI conversation. I think that one of the challenges that all technology companies face is, where's the budget center, right? Mm-hmm. Is IT paying for this, or is some line of business paying for this? And I think if you reconcile that challenge, you then reconcile what kind of ROI you're building. And are we trying to prove, back to the marketing user, are we trying to prove that you are overspending already and that this is going to give you a 12-month ROI because the 50% of wasted marketing money you can finally find? Yeah. And you're willing to put that money forward? Or is it the IT team who's supposed to be ponying up that money because, hey, it's a tool, right? And IT is supposed to provide me the tools that I need to be successful. You have to know who your economic buyer is. You have to understand who's going to be the user and the beneficiary of the tool. I also think the second thing is, and this is the hardest thing for IT people to do, is they view every expense as a net new expense. They very rarely go back and try to understand, well, how much do I really spend on my data center, the people managing that data center, and doing all the things that I already do today, as if it's impossible for me to change them. If you try to engage in a conversation that something goes away when something happens new, they resist that. But, technology over time has demonstrated that that's in fact what happens. The company that decided that they weren't going to go to computing because they were perfectly good with their mainframe ticket, is dead. They're going to have to move down these paths. They're going to have to retire legacy processes. And they're going to have to acknowledge that there is a little bit of risk in that with these new capabilities come things they're not doing today that will help their business. Whether that means buying or selling data, or changing decision-making processes from weekly and monthly to hourly, because the data is there to drive that. There's that little bit of bet and risk that they're going to have to be that company that pushes the envelope, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries. I want to ask you, Susan, a question actually, because I'm kind of, I don't believe that kind of looking at existing budget will solve it. That, you can slice it certain way, but we are talking about making that budget 10 times bigger, So as long as data is seen as a cost center, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be, the budget you get allocated, you can spend it better and so on, but ultimately it's a limited budget. So Susan, I wanted to ask you, you have a long kind of experience in this industry. How do we increase the budgets, 10 times? And fundamentally, how do we kind of change the perspective of data as a cost center and make it look more as a revenue center? Because then the budgets are not really a function of how much do I want to spend, but a portion of how much do I actually make.
I had a really good friend of mine who's one of the smartest chief data officers I know in the business. And he articulated it really well this way. He said, as a chief data officer, you can play offense or you can play defense. Mm-hmm. And when you're playing defense, you're trying to justify everything because of regulatory, compliance, governance. Oh, I've got to spend this money because we've got to be compliant with GDPR, CCPA, or, we had a data breach, so we got to fix it. Mm-hmm. And that's how you can get budget. And it's valid. Obviously, you have to do that. But the really successful CDOs, I think, play defense because it's required, but also play offense. And offense is all about business opportunities that you can exploit with data, whether you monetize it, meaning I think a lot of people jump to the conclusion you have to sell data to monetize it. And I'm not necessarily sure you have to actually sell data, but just think about how much more differentiated your products or offerings could be if they were data driven or had embedded data within it. Mm-hmm. So I think this notion of ROI, certainly you have to play defense. You have to protect this asset called data and respond to regulatory pressures. But playing offense means you're utilizing this great asset, your data, to differentiate your offerings, to make your customers more successful, to make your salespeople more efficient and productive, to make your doctors more efficient and smarter, to make your assembly line workers, if you manufacture a product, your sellers, your customer success managers, everybody more productive, more efficient, and allowing your customers to actually service their end customers better and more effectively because of data. So I think CDOs today have to do or build business cases that are offense and defense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I want to piggyback off of Susan's point. I think, sure, it's going to be a cost center if you do nothing with the data, right? Mm-hmm. And I also question if it's really going to cost more. Personally, if you do it right and do it well, it's not going to cost more. So very simple example, right? So being in the marketing organization, we have tons of signals and data across the board. But one of the key things we always look at is based on trends. Let's say our content. We know what content our customers love, and that's the type of content we would produce for ebooks and webinars, so we can drive more registrations and conversions, and then our sales will be able to contact them and pitch our products because of all this data, right? Now, it's a different story if we capture all these signals, be it from structured, unstructured, and just sitting there in our data warehouse and we do nothing with it. Yeah, and that's a problem. So at the end of the day, it's really a partnership between IT, the business, and if you have a data analytics team or office of the CDO, really catering to that business unit and providing guidance and making sure how they can make the most out of the data that they have.
And we will get to the CDO in the next section, but your question, it doesn't need to be more expensive. I believe it needs to be more expensive. There is actually a McKinsey study. They studied leaders in analytics, kind of, all of the companies that can really leverage data, and they actually say that it's probably 10x time, they spend 10x time on average than kind of the laggards, and they are spending most of the money. Mike used that term, on the last mile. That companies are not spending enough money on scaling analytics and consumption and so on. So I do believe it's going to be, if for anyone who wants to really kind of leverage data, move to the cloud, and transform the company and build a profit center out of it, it's going to be more expensive, but ROI should be easily justifiable by increased revenue and data-driven products and so on. Let's talk about organization, and it's actually interesting. Even the name of our segment is the analytics leaders in BI. So even in the name of the segment, you already have analytics different from BI, and we talked today about the CDO, and we can talk about CIO and the CAO and the BI leader and AI leader and so on. Again, I will start with a question or maybe some assumption that I believe that the biggest problem of data over the last 10 years or maybe 50 years, all the data silos that are now going away with the cloud and cloud data warehouses and SaaS products and so on. The next decade will be all about getting rid of the organizational silos that prevent companies from managing the end-to-end pipelines. And so can we actually talk about it? And maybe the first question, like, what is the role of the CDO, and why do companies need 5 different departments that are not collaborating? And maybe Dax can actually start with that. Like, you have the data pipeline people and data AI people and so on. I have an anecdote to share. I recently spoke to the head of data pipeline or data production of a very large bank here, and he told me that if anyone finds out that he talks to a BI company, he can get fired because he's kind of outside of the limits of his department because there's another BI team that is supposed to talk to me. So how do we get rid of these data organizational silos that are clearly not helping with the budgets and the results and ROIs and the overall results? Are you on mute?
Yes, I was. So 2 quick things, right? Because of the clouds you mentioned, it's breaking down all the silos, making data accessible and richer. And I think organizations should always think about, okay, now that we have this awesome technology, what are we trying to get to? Instead of really trying to continue to think about what are the different departments or silos and start there, right? Common organizations or roles that I see, especially today, are the CDO, Chief Data Officer, which by definition manages the data for the organization. And then what I'm seeing lately is this Chief Analytics Officer, CAO, who leads analytics, who's trying to make sense of it. And with customers I work with, is the CAO works a lot with the business, trying to figure out business intelligence, how to make the most out of data. But these 2 roles can complement. Now, if your organization is not as large or as mature, at the very least, start with a role that, first of all, somebody owning the data set and making sense of it. If CDO is something that you're looked at or you have, look at that role in that team and see what they're doing today and which parts of the business that they touch. But long term, certainly as data grows and the need to make sense of the data is increasing, then you'll find other roles such as CAO that would be instrumental.
So Susan, Mike, is the CDO the same as the CAO, or is it different? And is the AI lead different than the BI lead? So what's your perspective on this kind of organizational silos?
I think it's all getting squished together. That's a technical term.
I hope so. Yeah.
I think these roles, I think these hard lines between these roles are really getting obscured. And I think that what we're going to see is it depends on the culture of the organization. And I've even seen a title CDAO, Chief Data and Analytics Officer. So my advice to the folks on the call today is, don't necessarily let titles dictate what's the right thing to do for the business. And I know we're going to get to this, but once you define your overall data strategy and then your data ops discipline to serve that strategy, let the organization come out of that. And you're exactly right, Roman. The way you teed this question up, everybody is doing analytics. There's so many shadow IT organizations in large enterprises now. Everybody's a citizen data scientist because they want to be smarter and they want to do their job better. So this notion of building bigger walls and silos between the groups is just insanity because you're not going to be able to sustain it. People are going to get their data one way or the other. And it's just a matter of, do they get the right data? Do they use it responsibly? Mm-hmm. So if you want to have a good data ops and data management strategy, embrace those constituents, bring them in and keep them safe. Don't let them do harm with data. But the only way that you're really going to have a coherent data strategy is to engage all these various constituencies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Mike, again, your company success depends on having access to data warehouse. If you work with a CIO who says, well, the data warehouse is owned by the CDO and we don't have access to it and we have to build our own connections and I will get you data directly from Salesforce and Marketo and so on. That's a huge problem with BI, is that it's an island that doesn't work with the rest of the company. That I get all these questions like, how many connectors do you have in GoodData? Because we have no access to data warehouse. We have no access to this. We have to build another layer of untransparent and ungoverned data. So how do you actually work in an organization where the CIO is different than the CDO and you don't get access to the data warehouse? Or how would you recommend structuring that organization?
There's an old joke, right? When you the new CEO takes over from the old CEO and there are 3 envelopes and he says, when things go wrong, open the first envelope and it's reorganize. Mm-hmm. Or blame your predecessor that reorganized, then write 3 envelopes, and so I how to organize a company is so far beyond, or I should say that there would be one answer to that question. I think is beyond my pay grade. I do agree with your point though, that we've confused outcomes with organization at the tips, right? We already know most companies can tell you their outcomes, right? They're trying to raise revenue and they know who's accountable. They're trying to lower costs and they know who's accountable for that too. I think the question needs to be asked, do they have the right data to do it? And if the answer is no, and that's either in terms of the type, the quantity, the granularity, the frequency, the data strategy should fall out of that. If that requires that you have to have a champion and a CDO to do it, then that's great for your company. Yeah. If your BI team can do it, that's great for your company. I think that the pressures are already there. I think the existence of a CDO proves it. But I also think if you ask your average BI or analytics person, are they doing the job that they want to do? Most are not. Most are doing right. They're doing administrative tasks. They're updating dashboards or doing data extracts or writing reports. They want to be in the world that we talked about earlier. They're trying to find the interesting patterns that are going on. They don't want to be processing tickets. So there's already an organizational problem. But I do think that solving business problems with organization is a proven failure over many generations of business leaders that have nothing to do with data. I go back to Susan's point. We already know what our departments are accountable for. Let's ask them, what is it that makes their decisions better? And then let everything else fall out of that.
Yeah, and I absolutely believe that this kind of organizational silos are a reflection of kind of the defensive in technology stacks. I'm in charge of the data warehouse, and I will only let few people in. And I'm in charge of BI, and I don't need to talk to anyone because ultimately I will get all of my data sets through my connectors and CSV files and so on. I think it leads to a major level of duplication that, these things are duplicated 5 times over. And, I would open the first envelope. I would reorganize, I would actually the second one, I would blame it on the predecessor and then reorganize. That's what I would do.
I think the key though is regardless of what title, how many departments, somebody has to be responsible and accountable. There needs to be a chokeable neck, right?
Absolutely. And the measure is ROI. The measure is, are people actually using, are you getting ROI? We have 4 minutes. I wanted to talk about, and maybe last thing is kind of the future of BI. Is BI going to be replaced completely by AI? Are we going to be all out of business in 5 years because all the data pipelines will be fully augmented and there will be no need for collaboration or spreadsheets because the insights will pop up automatically out of some AI machines and so on? What's your vision? Where does AI and BI kind of collaborate again or compete, or where is it all going?
I think AI will complement BI. It's not going to go away. It's not one or the other. When that day comes, AI takes over BI. I think we're not in this planet anymore. So I think it's still a way ahead, but I think they work hand in hand. They can complement each other.
Mike, Susan?
I say they are complementary. I think what will probably go away and be replaced by more, and Roman, I think you would absolutely agree with this. I think data served up in the context of your role, in the context of the business process that you're in the context of the device or however it needs to be delivered to you, I think that will replace a static once a month report or dashboard. So I don't want to get into semantics if dashboard equates to BI or AI, et cetera, but I do think that notion of information will be served up to you in context, in the place, in the device, in the middle of whatever you're doing, will replace a static once a month, once a week, once a day flash report or whatever it is, where you still have to kind of hunt and peck and search and drill up and drill down to find what you need. I think AI or BI is going to get smarter and smarter and smarter to serve it up to you when you need it versus you having to go look for it.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And I absolutely agree. My point is that it's all expensive.
Yeah.
Dashboards are easy. Dashboards are cheap. You put some stuff up there and you don't even care if anyone's using it. BI or AI or insights in your business process, the way you described it, it's expensive and it has to be justified by the higher ROI. I need to get more out of that business process if I enable it with data because it's expensive. And that's kind of going back to that kind of ROI investment discussion. But Mike, we have one more minute. So
I'll make it quick. I think the big change, and I'm not to point of semantics, whether what's AI exactly, I think is a debatable point for many people already. But I do think the question is this, and I think Susan raised dashboards. I think what will change though is whether we've made decisions based on things that happened in the past or things that are extrapolated into the future. We're very poor at the latter one. We do not do a lot of scenario modeling. We're not very good at sensitivity analysis. And I think a lot of these tools are really not so much about whether they're AI or BI or something else. It's really about trying to understand, if this is what already happened, what are the 5 things that could happen? And am I thinking about how I model those things out, how I track changes, how likely or unlikely they become over time? This is why the dashboard is kind of maligned and probably dead. It's like driving in your rearview mirror, sort of supposing that because the road looked a certain way when you just went down it, that the road ahead is the same. It's not. So I think that's what the change people are looking for looks like.
Yeah, I agree. At the same time, the transition to data trust that will allow people to trust the future coming from data. People don't trust what happened, let alone, trusting what actually will happen and so on. So I think that would be another 1 hour call where we would talk about what needs to happen for anyone to trust what the machine is telling me about my business in a year. And this was fun. Thank you all for joining us, everyone who listens, and I'm sure that we will meet again and we will talk about the trust in data.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.